considered adopting, you've probably heard people tell you, just make sure you don't adopt out of birth order. And I get it, this can sometimes throw things off, and there are some challenges that come along with it. However, I think it's really interesting when people give this piece of advice because we did adopt out of birth order, and I'm not so sure that it made as big of a difference as some people think it does. So let's jump in and talk about that. Hey there, and welcome back to my channel. So if you are new here and you've never stumbled across my videos before, my name is Katie and I'm an adoptive mom to 3 kids, ages 4 through 12. And we did in fact adopt out of birth order. So all 3 of my children are adopted, and we actually adopted our youngest first, and then we adopted our older 2 children later. If you're not subscribed, I hope you'll click the subscribe button so we can hang out more and you'll never miss one of my videos. Back in 2019, we were matched with our daughter when she was about 1.5, and then we adopted her when she was about 2. A year or so later, we decided, hey, I think we're ready to start adopting again. And we were actually matched very quickly. And this time we were matched with my 2 older kids, who at the time were 5 and 9. And I definitely think I had heard people say, like, don't adopt out of birth order. It's not something to do. But I guess I always wondered, does it really matter that much? And I will tell you now from my experience, the answer is yes and no. So let me explain. So I'm going to share with you difficulties that we experienced adopting out of birth order, and also benefits that we noticed with adopting out of birth order. So let's jump into the difficulties first. The number one most frustrating thing we experienced when adopting out of birth order is the effect that our older kids had upon our younger child. When you only have one child in your home, and especially when they're like a toddler or pretty young, you are the main source of influence in that child's life. So you have a lot more control, I would say, over how your child acts or how they speak to others, because they're really only hearing you and how you treat others and how you treat them. And so I will say we were pretty proud of the fact that we had trained our youngest daughter to say thank you all the time and to be polite to people and to pick up after herself. And there were a lot of things that I felt like, wow, for being, 3 years old, she's actually pretty polite and she has these good manners. And we don't hear her saying like potty words or things like that you sometimes hear kids that age doing. And so I was feeling pretty good about myself. Well, enter our 2 oldest children. And the truth is, these kids came from a very different experience. They've been raised by multiple different people over their lives. And even though their foster mom had high expectations of them and she had rules in her home as well, they were slightly different than the rules in our house. And in some ways, we had less rules. And so they started kind of pushing the boundaries and doing things, and manners kind of were just like out the window in those first few months. There was just a lot of change and adjustment going on all sides. And one thing we noticed that just drove us crazy is like they never said thank you. It was always like, and we had trained Brielle to say those things and to say that all the time, and they never did it. And so slowly that kind of rubbed off on her. And then as well, you also have the situation with an older child. And that was a small thing, but basically Brielle started picking up every bad habit our older kids had. Now, if you have children in birth order or adopt in birth order, you don't get to see the switch flip from basically I'm this well-behaved child who's doing things they're supposed to bam, all of a sudden they've picked up all these bad habits. Because the truth is, like, older siblings have influences on younger siblings, but if the older sibling has been there since the child's birth, it's gradual. It's just a natural acclimation, a natural way of picking up that older sibling's habits. And so we went from having this 3-year-old who was actually pretty sweet and doing a great job to bam, she started rolling her eyes at me. Rolling her eyes, okay? That is, in case you're wondering, that's not normal for a 3-year-old. I actually Googled it one time because I was like, I just feel like this is not a normal thing for a 3-year-old to do to their parents. And obviously, like, we had a preteen, she's rolling her eyes sometimes. It just happens. So I Google 3-year-old rolling eyes. And do you want to know what comes up on that search? kids having like medical problems or seizures. So yeah, it's not normal for a kid to be sassily rolling their eyes at you at age 3. So that was definitely frustrating to see that she's that age where she's a little sponge and she just soaks up everything, the good and the bad. And there were good habits that our kids were teaching her, but there were more bad habits, to be perfectly honest with you. They're kids, that's just how it is. So it was kind of frustrating to feel like, okay, we're on this good path. We have this kid who's doing what they're supposed to do. And then all of a sudden they're hearing potty words and they're hearing these like kind of rude phrases said to them. And so now they're experimenting saying them. And yeah, that part was very frustrating. The second thing that was difficult about adopting out of birth order is we'd kind of gotten in a groove. We'd gotten in a groove with having a 2 or 3-year-old. We were pretty used to it. And then all of a sudden, we are just like catapulted into preteen land. Now, I have been a middle school teacher for quite a while and a high school teacher, so I am kind of used to that age range. But still, like, you're just not only thrown into parenting, but parenting a kid who's had this whole life before you met them, and you're getting to know them, let alone getting to know how to be a parent to a kid that age. So that was a little tricky when we already had a younger child who needed a lot of attention. Whereas if you adopted more in a birth order, that older child would have probably been with you for a while and you'd be adjusted with them. There'd be some transition there that had already happened before you bring in this younger child who has more physical needs and day-to-day needs where you have to help them with pretty much everything. And so I won't lie, that was very challenging for us because it was a lot of learning with older kids while at the same time still having a kid who was pretty young and needed us a lot. So I definitely understand in that sense why people say, adopt in birth order, you don't want to break it, because there are frustrations. The last difficulty that I would say this was a really big one, and this one ran deeper. Like, when Brielle was picking up the bad habits from the older kids, that was more just like, I'm rolling my eyes now. Maybe she got it from me. But it was definitely difficult. But this next thing just goes a lot deeper, and it was really hard to know how to handle it. So one of the most difficult things to me was that because we had a 2-3-year-old at the time, the older kids were very jealous of her, which I think is extremely natural. I think anyone gets jealous of a younger sibling sometimes and the attention they get, but especially because the younger sibling had more bonding with the parents than the older siblings did. And I think there's a level of feeling threatened in that situation. And because Brielle was only 2 or 3 at the time that they moved in, that is a time when that child needs a lot of attention. They need you to help them with everything. Kids that age need you to help them with things. They're sitting in your lap a lot. They're cuddling with you. You're helping them with their food a lot more. There's just so much more hands-on parenting with a kid that age. And so I think the jealousy factor is higher because of that as well. So we felt like oftentimes our older 2 kids saw how we were interacting with our youngest, and they felt like they weren't being loved unless we were treating them the exact same way. And I'm just going to tell you, treating a 10-year-old or 11-year-old the same way that you are treating a 3-year-old is very awkward. It's not something that people typically do. It feels very weird. It doesn't feel natural in any sort of way. And so that was really hard. Even with a 5 or 6-year-old, you treat them differently than you treat a 2-year-old. So there were definitely times where, I'll give an example of, we were swimming. And at this point, Brielle's like 2. And so she's jumping into the pool and I'm catching her. And then she's getting up and doing it again. I have to catch her. Like, she can't swim yet. And one of our older kids was like, catch me. And I'm like, I can't catch you. You're too big. Like, it doesn't work like that. But I realized that this child saw us treating Brielle this way and felt left out, or that we weren't showing them love, because they viewed that as us showing more love to Brielle. So finding ways to give kind of the same level of attention, but in a more age-appropriate way, was very challenging. Because if you have a 10 or 11-year-old who wants to be held like they're 3, That's not very easy to do. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not a huge like physical touch person. And so that was really hard for me because when I was that age, I didn't really like cuddle with my parents, or like that just wasn't something I wanted to do. I was just like, I'm too old for that. And you know, kids from trauma, even if they're not being adopted out of birth order, they typically will be emotionally younger, and it makes total sense, but that doesn't mean it's easy. And I do think when you have a younger child in the home who you're already bonded with, it adds this layer of jealousy and adds this layer of competition. So definitely something to look out for. That was probably the hardest thing in the first year or so, was just adjusting to that and figure out, how do I show love to this kid without feeling like I have to treat them like they're two? Because I'm sorry, it just didn't work for me. I know that some kind of adoption and foster care advocates will talk about treating your child like they're much, much younger. And I do think it's good to not expect your child to act older, but my husband and I did not go the route of treating our kids like they were far younger than they were. We didn't have as high of expectations, but we did still set expectations. And you know what? They met those expectations at the end. Like, we were able to eventually get there, and that worked for us. Okay, so now that we've heard about the kind of not so great things about adopting out of birth order, I want to talk about the benefits because in my opinion, the benefits actually outweigh the difficulties. You can see if you agree with me or not. So one of the big reasons we decided to adopt out of birth order, after we got our initial placement with Brielle, we were like, okay, we're definitely going to be adopting older kids, because Brielle was extremely jealous anytime we gave any attention to a baby or a child younger than her. It was interesting. I know so that happens sometimes, but her reaction was very extreme. Like, if we ever held a friend's baby, she would get extremely jealous and try to climb up our bodies, and she would scream until, you know, I would pass my friend's baby off to my husband, and then she'd leave me and scream and try to climb up him. I think she felt very threatened by a younger child. And like I said, I know this can be a common experience. Even if you give birth to kids, they feel jealous of the child. But it was, I don't know how to describe it. It was like a primal scream, very upset, almost like a survival thing is what it felt like. Like, I need you to love me, because if you love this younger child, I will be forgotten, is kind of the feeling that we had with that. And so we definitely were kind of like, ooh, I don't think adopting a younger kid is a great idea. And something I thought was really interesting is that while Brielle was really upset if we held or talked to or played with younger children, like children younger than her, she was completely fine when she was around older children. And even if Nick or I, my husband and I, gave attention to, like, you know, a kid at church, like one of our friends' kids who was older than Brielle, she didn't care. It did not bother her at all if we gave them a hug. It didn't bother her if we were talking to them. She just wanted to be included in it. And she loved the attention she got from the older children as well. I think it helped her feel special and included. And so we're like, I think she would do well with kids who are a little bit older, because it's not as threatening to her, because a younger child than her would just be fully sucking up all of our attention, while a kid older than her, even though they need some of our attention, they're also providing her with some attention. And so for us, it was kind of a no-brainer that we were going to be open to adopting kids older than her, because it just seemed like a better fit. I cannot imagine if we had brought a younger child in and she was screaming all the time and so upset and hurt. I don't think it would have been good. So I'm happy we did what we did. Another reason to be open to adopting out of birth order, and this is a benefit I think, is that it opens you up to be able to adopt so many more kids. The truth is that adopting older kids is such a need. Like, if you want to adopt a baby, and if you're going into adoption thinking like, I really want to make a difference, and you only want to adopt an infant, I mean, I don't want to say you're not making a difference, but there are plenty of families who want to adopt a baby. There are plenty of families who want to adopt a young toddler. When we were being considered for Brielle, there were like, I don't know, 18 other families or something like that being considered at the same time, and they narrowed it down slowly until it was just us left. So clearly, there are people who will adopt younger children. However, when we adopted our older two children, we were the only family being considered, because we were the only family who expressed interest. And the social workers told me, they said, the reason no one else has expressed interest is because The oldest is almost 10, and most people are not open to adopting kids that old, which really 10 isn't even that old. There are plenty of teenagers who need families as well. And so I think it's really good to keep your mind open because there are so many older kids who need families. And if you're so stuck on birth order, you could really miss out on a kid that actually might be, you might be a better fit for them. You might be a better fit for them than you would be for a younger child. You never know. And so just being open to that can expedite your adoption process. It can open you up to so many more possibilities. And so I think it's totally worth it. And in my opinion, when you're adopting, birth order just is not the most important thing to worry about. There's so many other things that are so much more important when you're going through this kind of decision-making process. And I think sometimes, we think about age, and I made a video called like with adopting ages and everything, which I will link below as well. But I just think we get caught up on the age of the child and don't see that it doesn't matter. You could have like 5 different 10-year-olds and they all have completely different stories, completely different personalities. Sure, one of those kids may show like more difficult behaviors than another, but you could have another one who's doing great in school and treats people well and, still has their struggles, but it's not as bad. I just think being open to adopting kids out of birth order is a good idea. It just opens up so many more opportunities for you. It's meeting a big need for adopting older kids. And it could turn out great. I'll be honest, were there days when my daughter was saying potty words at the dinner table and I thought, I brought this upon myself. I decided to adopt kids older than my toddler who used to be more well-behaved. But it's so worth it. To me, I think it's just not that big of a deal. It doesn't affect things quite as much. And I just want to leave you with 2 things. So the first one is that, the bottom line is that foster kids who are older are at such a higher risk of aging out of the foster care system. Once they hit a certain age, it's like very difficult for them to be adopted. And so you could really make a difference in a kid's life by being willing to adopt an older child and maybe in the same time adopting out of birth order. And my other thing I want to mention is I think most people don't want to adopt out of birth order because they feel like it's going to cause this disruption with their family. It's going to make their kids feel like, oh, everything's changing. In my opinion, adoption is going to completely blow up your life no matter what. Your life is not going to look anything like it did before. You're going to go through so many changes. You're going to have a lot of growing pains. It's going to be a huge change for everyone in your family, whether that child is younger or older. So obviously, you need to make the choice that's best for your family. I'm not trying to force you or pressure you too much to adopt out of birth order, but I think it's good to just be open to considering it and thinking through, what if we tried? And what if we just wait and see if we feel like one of the profiles sticks out to us, and then that can be our deciding factor. And if you're asking my advice, what I would recommend is that when you fill out your child characteristic checklist when you're in the adoption process, I would consider opening your age range a little bit to possibly adopt kids that are older, possibly even older than your oldest child. But know that that does not mean that you have to say yes to a match of an older child. All this does is open up your parameters so that you can view more profiles. You can be considered for more children. And so what that does is that gives you the ability to actually look at a file of a kid who's like a couple years older than your oldest child and say, you know what, actually, I've seen a lot of profiles that just we didn't seem like a good fit for, but this kid really feels like a good fit for our family. And if not, if you find them and you're like, no, I still don't feel good about this, then say no to those matches. You don't have to say yes. It won't hurt you. That won't go against you in any way. It won't be a problem. So just know you have the freedom to have more open parameters at the beginning, but then ultimately decide to still go with adopting a child younger than your other children. So saying you're open to it doesn't mean you're committing to it. That's what I like to remind people. I think people think that form is like, if I say yes, then they're going to give me a kid and they're going to say, you have to take this kid. That's not how it works. And I just want to remind you guys that I am an adoption consultant. And if you are thinking of adopting and you're working through these questions like, should I adopt out of birth order? Should I adopt at all? What agency should I use? How do I go about this whole process? I am here for you. So I would absolutely love to work with you. I always pin a comment below with the link to my website, as well as put it in the description box. I have 2 different session links you can pick from. I have a 60-minute and a 90-minute, and I have gotten wonderful feedback from different clients. Plus, it's been really cool because every person I've worked with found me through YouTube. So it's kind of fun to put a face to the name of the people I see in the comments a lot. And so I have just absolutely loved it, and I would love to work with you too. Thank you so much for watching this video, and you're my favorite because you made it all the way to the end. And so something I've been doing recently is the people who make it to the end of the video, because you're my absolute favorites, we're gonna do a little secret thing. So if you made it all the way to the end, in the comments, I would love to hear how many siblings you have and then how many kids you would like to have. Because I always think it's interesting to see if people from big families want big families, or if they want small families, or if they were an only child and now they want a huge family. I don't know, I just think it's so interesting because both my husband and I come from families of 3 kids, and now we have 3 kids. So I would love to know that. Tell me how many siblings you have and how many kids you would like to have. And if you made it this far in the video, like, I'm assuming you liked it a little bit, so if you could hit the like button, that really helps my videos get out to more potential adoptive parents. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great week. I'll see you soon.